At times, life seems like an unending cycle of events that cannot be broken even with the purest intentions and desires. Trials may fall upon the heads of the best people, constantly demanding their attention and strength, as if the world is trying to see who among them can become stronger. The cycle in Jimena's life began when her father left the family, abandoning Anita and her daughter when the latter was only 13 years old. Jimena vividly remembered that fateful day when she woke up to the sound of shouting from the next room, an argument between her father and mother. The girl didn't leave her room to find out what was happening, but from the snippets she heard through the door, she learned that her father had found another woman and was now insulting Anita with every curse he knew. When the shouting finally stopped and the front door slammed shut, Jimena cautiously came out and found her mother crying on the hallway floor. She was inconsolable. Jimena immediately understood what had happened and that she would most likely never see her father again. Realizing that her mother felt 100 times worse, she set about comforting her, fully aware that their lives would never be the same. "Mom, I won't leave you. We can manage without him," Jimena whispered to her mother, feeling tears on her own cheeks, trying to believe what she was saying. "I'll help more around the house, and everything will definitely get better, you will see. Just know that I love you and will never abandon you in times of trouble." That day, Jimena took over all the household chores, skipping school for the first time to help her mother cope with the overwhelming problems. She tended to the livestock, the garden, cleaned the barn and house, and finally cooked dinner, as her mother was still too shattered after what had happened. For the next few days, the girl had to work hard, but her efforts were not in vain. Her mother finally saw the zeal with which her daughter was willing to drop everything to help her and pulled herself together, returning to her usual work. Joining Jimena in the garden, she began to convince herself that even without a husband, they could do everything within their power to move forward. And looking at her daughter, Anita decided not to give up and to improve their life together, no matter what the future held. Everything would have been much better if they lived in the city, but unfortunately, they were from a small, humble village. And although this life had its advantages, living in such a place without a man's help was difficult, for both mother and daughter had to take on the responsibilities that the man who ran off to his mistress in the city used to handle. They took turns chopping wood, feeding the livestock, handling the fertilizers, and weeding the garden. Everything that used to be easier became twice as hard. But supporting each other, they both found warmth and joy in their modest life. Early risings, constant care of the household, and helping her mother took up most of Jimena's day, leaving her with neither the energy nor the time for her studies. She tried her best, although her teachers were often upset. Jimena would sometimes fall asleep in class, not bring her homework, or fail to score enough points on a test to get a good grade. And no matter how much Anita scolded her daughter, saying she could spend more time studying, Jimena continued to work hard alongside her mother to prevent her from falling into the despair that once engulfed her after her husband's departure. Due to missed classes, poor grades, and inattentiveness, the girl received a corresponding certificate at the end of school, not exactly bad, but nothing to shine with either. Such mediocre grades severely limited her opportunities to enter any prestigious institution, so she enrolled in a simple, unremarkable college and trained to be a chemical plant operator so that after graduation she could work at a factory in the neighboring town. Her plan was simple: if she worked hard, she could help her mother with money, and if anything happened, it wouldn't be far to travel to her home village. Anita promised her daughter that she would continue to work on their farm and send her various vegetables, fruits, and possibly meat. Thus, Jimena finished her studies and headed to the city, where she managed to get a job as a machine operator at the only factory in the nearby district. However, life there wasn't easy either. The factory, which produced TNT, was more like a frighteningly old and dilapidated warehouse, looking as if its walls might collapse at any moment. The workdays seemed incredibly long and arduous due to the many intricacies of TNT production, and the numerous safety rules and heavy protective suits that had to be worn every day were not even worth mentioning. Some of these protective suits were so old they had to be patched up, and the old-timers always had a few tips on how to stay safe, since the factory administration couldn't provide all workers with the necessary equipment to work without worrying about dangerous fumes and chemical poisoning. Due to funding issues, the factory also had very old machinery. Although the technicians did their best to keep the equipment operational, it would occasionally jam or break down, increasing the number of emergencies. Frequent accidents led to another problem, an incredible turnover rate. Some workers left after getting injured, while others couldn't stand the terrible working conditions. But Jimena couldn't leave. She saw no other job opportunities for herself, and her responsibility to her mother didn't allow her to give up. So she worked, enduring the heavy protective suit and the very hazardous job. One thing kept her going: the harmful nature of the work meant that workers could retire early. She hoped to diligently earn her pension, retire, and return to her mother in the village to help her with the household. In the meantime, she had to endure the harsh working conditions, incredible fatigue, and the modest room in the workers' dormitory. Initially, she was surprised by the large number of people living in the dormitory. The building housed far more people than it should have. There were not only workers, but entire families living there. During the first few weeks, Jimena often reminisced about the peace and quiet of the village, the fresh air, and the absence of noisy neighbors. After all, the nearest houses were so far away, beyond the fields and gardens. Here, however, the overcrowded rooms, the constant noise of children playing in the corridors wherever they were allowed, all created the impression of a bustling anthill that never knew peace. Noise, clamor, shouting, stomping, how could one rest in the midst of all this? But Jimena soon got used to it. Fortunately, she was very lucky with her immediate roommates. One of her roommates was a seasoned matron in her 40s, once married, but her husband had died in an accident almost immediately after their wedding. The grief-stricken stress affected the woman, causing her to lose their child, and she remained childless, still lovingly remembering her deceased husband. Her name was Ramona, and she often called Jimena daughter. Though this initially made Jimena a bit uncomfortable, she eventually got used to it, as Ramona's motherly kindness and care helped brighten each workday. Ramona was a master of chemical production, leading a whole group of workers in the workshop. She often affectionately called her subordinates her children and frequently helped everyone, with advice or with deeds. It seemed that it was enough for this woman to be useful and diligent in a job that many simply couldn't handle. The second roommate was a young girl, only 24 years old. At first glance, Rosa seemed cheerful, coquettish, and frivolous, always batting her eyes at men. Slightly plump but in a pleasant way, she had beautiful curves and tried to draw attention to her beauty from the opposite sex. She basked in compliments, flirted with almost everyone, but didn't allow anyone to say behind her back that she actually craved only attention and numerous lovers. Only after some time did Jimena learn that Rosa had fled to the city from her mother. The latter was an alcoholic and had kicked her daughter out of the house, accusing the girl of stealing her boyfriend. However, when Jimena heard the story for the first time, she noticed the extraordinary sadness that appeared in Rosa's eyes and immediately realized that it was not the girl who was the cause of this scandal, but rather her mother's boyfriend was a scoundrel. The alcoholic mother did not believe her own daughter when she saw protection, support, and help from her. Rosa hid her bitterness behind laughter, but Jimena saw the immense pain and sorrow in her eyes and felt terrified every time she understood how painful it was for Rosa when she remembered the past. Months passed, and Jimena gradually settled into the routine and life with her neighbors, slowly getting to know them better. Although all three had been battered by a tough life, they never lost heart and tried to support each other in difficult times and help in any way they could. Over time, Jimena began to notice how sometimes, at some celebration, Rosa would drink and then go off alone to cry quietly. One day, noticing again how the girl headed away from the gathered company celebrating another birthday, Jimena approached Rosa, intrigued that the usually open and cheerful girl had once again decided to be alone with herself. "Are you okay?" Jimena asked awkwardly, looking into her friend's tear-filled eyes. "Don't pay attention, Jimena," Rosa replied, wiping away her tears and giving a forced smile. "I just remembered something. If you want, we can talk about what's bothering you." "No, my friend, there's no need," Rosa shook her head. "Better go back to our friends. I'll be fine. I promise." And although Jimena didn't want to leave her alone, Rosa insisted that she be left in peace. Later, after the gathering had ended and everyone had left, and Rosa had gone to sleep, Ramona told Jimena that Rosa cries because of her past, remembering how cruelly her own mother and her scoundrel boyfriend treated her. But still, there were good days in their lives. Sometimes Jimena would receive all sorts of pickles, vegetables, and even meat from the village. Ramona managed to get bonuses for her kids in the workshop from the factory management, or Rosa would bring another gift from one of her many suitors seeking her attention. All these pleasant little things brightened up the hard life and routine in the dormitory. There was something extraordinary in this warm cooperation among the neighbors, and Jimena began to understand why neither Ramona nor Rosa wanted to leave the dormitory. Yes, undoubtedly, having their own apartment had its advantages, but there was also something in this life where there was more than just simple coexistence between neighbors. There was something romantic about everyone being ready to help at any moment, and it seemed that living next to co-workers strengthened the friendship and cooperation between different workshops. All of this was somehow sincere and without any pretense. And although sometimes there were screams and quarrels in the neighboring rooms, it seemed that nothing could break the people living in the building, and everyone found the strength to reconcile, apologize, and improve each other's lives, whether with a gift, a heartfelt conversation, or advice. Jimena loved the dormitory with all its diversity of people and experiences. But she also did not forget her native village. Her mother, who continued to manage everything without her daughter's help, occasionally visited Jimena and always brought treats. Whether vegetables and fruits, pickles, or jam that the woman made herself, all this reminded Jimena of home, giving her memories of how they worked together on the farm and jointly pickled vegetables or made various jams. And then, one day, after meeting her mother at the station with heavy bags full of goodies and giving her money for other needs, Jimena unexpectedly encountered a man. As with everything in life, it was by chance. After sending her mother off on the train, Jimena picked up the heavy bags, and a handsome man, engrossed in the map on his phone screen, bumped into her. "Oh my God, forgive me," the man immediately said, catching the girl who nearly fell. "I didn't see you at all." Jimena adjusted the heavy bag on her shoulder and smiled modestly, looking at his handsome, masculine face and seemingly bottomless eyes. She couldn't reply. The sound of his voice was so pleasant that it sent shivers down her spine, and she was afraid to open her mouth. She had never seen such a handsome man before, nor had she heard such a voice, and this made her very confused. "Please, let me help you. Your bags look so heavy." The man seemed genuinely trying to smooth over his clumsiness. No, it's fine. I'm used to it," Jimena mumbled, feeling a blush rise on her cheeks. How handsome he was. "I insist," he smiled, and Jimena realized she would never be able to forget such a charming smile and pleasant, velvety voice. The man insisted on helping Jimena with her bags, and she gave in to his persistence, allowing him to accompany her. There was something charming about the way he apologized and told her that he had just arrived in the city and was looking for an address. He seemed like a pleasant conversationalist, polite and kind. This was their first meeting. The man, whose name was Santino, turned out to be a real gentleman, behaving like characters in romantic movies or books. He was courteous, gentle, and kind, spoke beautifully, and every time he showered Jimena with compliments, she melted at the sound of his voice. He treated her as if she were a real princess. It didn't bother him that she worked in a factory and wore protective gear every day while working with dangerous chemicals. He didn't care that she lived in a dormitory and was originally from a small village. On the contrary, he seemed genuinely fascinated by her beauty and her stories about working at the factory. The incidents that periodically occurred there almost delighted him. But her roommates were not so carefree and trusting. Ramona silently observed how Jimena and Santino's romance developed, while Rosa couldn't hold back her warnings. "Be careful, Jimena," Rosa would say when her friend returned from another date. "Your Santino may be sweet, but he could deceive you." "Oh, Rosa. He's such a darling. He listens to my stories about work as if he's never heard anything more interesting." Jimena replied with a smile. That may be, but you have to understand that men are often attracted to a beautiful flower. And you are a beauty, no doubt about it. Just be careful with men, okay? And although Jimena brushed off her friend's words at that time, over time, Rosa turned out to be right. Her words were almost prophetic. Their relationship developed rapidly. At first, Santino was attentive and romantic. He showered Jimena with compliments, arranged surprises, gave her flowers, and took her to the best restaurants in the city. Jimena felt on top of the world and believed she had found the one she would spend her whole life with. However, over time, the relationship began to change. Unnoticed by herself, Jimena began to see that Santino had stopped showing the same care. Instead of warm hugs and heartfelt conversations, he increasingly spent time on his phone and preferred to be with friends rather than with her. His attention became fleeting and superficial, and the romantic gestures vanished like morning mist. Jimena tried not to give it much thought. She excused Santino by telling herself that he had a lot of work and worries, that these were temporary difficulties. But with each passing day, it became harder for her to ignore what was happening. Santino began to treat her not as a loved girlfriend, but as a secondary character to pass the evening with. He no longer cared about her wishes and feelings. Santino didn't ask how her day went, nor was he interested in her concerns and dreams. He simply used her company because it was convenient for him. Jimena tried to talk to Santino to explain what was troubling her. But every time, he brushed her off, promising that everything would get better, that they just needed to wait a little longer. She waited, hoping that he would change, that the Santino who had been there at the beginning of their relationship would return. But nothing changed. He had won her attention and affection, and now he was just taking advantage of her presence, giving nothing in return. Jimena dreamed that someday everything would get better, that Santino would propose to her, and they could get married and start a family with a few children who, without a doubt, would be as beautiful as Santino. However, the man turned out to be nothing like the romantic portrait Jimena had painted of him in her mind. As it turned out, Santino was just using Jimena's beauty and trust. And as soon as she got pregnant and told him the news, which she thought was wonderful, he immediately changed his expression and left silently. Jimena never saw him again and couldn't reach him. The scoundrel had run away like the coward he was, leaving pregnant Jimena alone with her problems. The girl mourned for a long time, shedding tears, not so much because she loved Santino, but because she had trusted his sweet words and charming smile. But Ramona and Rosa supported and comforted her as best they could. They strictly forbade her from considering an abortion and promised Jimena that they would help her with everything. "We won't fail," Ramona declared with maternal authority. "We'll take turns looking after the baby, caring for him, and if needed, we'll buy everything necessary." "Don't worry, sister," Rosa echoed the matron. "We will never abandon you. You'll see, everything will get better." Jimena listened to her friends and calmed down a bit, realizing that making a radical decision because of some scoundrel would be unfair to the little life growing inside her. Ramona took Jimena's hands in hers and honestly told the girl about how she lost her own child. For the first time, she shared what she felt when she found out that her body, due to stress and her husband's death, couldn't handle the strain, and how the doctors had to clean out what was supposed to be her child, whom she already loved. "That's how it is, dear," Ramona concluded, nodding. "So don't think about getting rid of the child. There are 3 of us, and only 1 child. Why wouldn't we manage? I'm used to looking after you all in the workshop like little children. 1 more won't scare me. Believe me, you can raise a child without any men." Rosa echoed the craftswoman, smiling. "Men often don't participate in raising children anyway, so how is this different from a regular family? You'll see, your child will be the happiest among others. After all, he will have 3 mothers." The kind words of her friends and dormitory neighbors warmed Jimena's heart, and she dismissed all thoughts of Santino and his vile act. Now she had a new goal, to give birth and raise the child sent to her by God. The pregnancy went relatively smoothly. At the factory, Jimena was given maternity leave, and she took on the responsibility of cleaning and cooking at home so that her friends would return from work to cleanliness, order, and good food. When the time came for the birth, the whole dormitory practically escorted Jimena to the hospital and welcomed her back the same way, throwing a celebration in honor of the new life brought into the world. The workshop colleagues, under Ramona's clear guidance, pitched in for gifts, and she returned home with her son to a whole pile of baby clothes, diapers, and other essentials for a new mother. And of course, Rosa and Ramona bought a beautiful cradle and several soft toys for the baby. Jimena couldn't be happier with the kindness and care of her colleagues and neighbors, who were always ready to look after her son, whom she named Juan, which means God is gracious. Everyone helped her, sometimes by covering for her at work, sometimes by taking care of Juan so that Jimena could get some sleep and rest. Ramona, who always played the role of everyone's mother, even managed to convince the management to allocate a small utility room and a cot for Jimena so she could nap during her work breaks. This helped her worry less about the difficulty of balancing work and motherhood. At first, Jimena thought about taking Juan to her mother, but she quickly realized that her elderly mother, who managed the household, wouldn't be able to give her grandson the necessary attention. She was struggling on her own as it was. But the close-knit family Jimena had found among her dormitory neighbors quickly convinced her otherwise. Within these walls, she always had someone to rely on, someone who could look after her son without asking for anything in return. Years passed, and Juan grew into a smart and active boy who caused no problems for anyone. He was kind and honest, always trying to help with the little ones in the dormitory, and seemed nothing like his runaway father. The entire dormitory sent him off to first grade along with several of his friends who were his age. The close-knit group supported each other in everything, even with homework and any school supplies they needed, such as notebooks and pens. It seemed that Juan did not suffer from the absence of his father and grew up as a happy and kind child, making his mother very proud. Continuing to work at the factory, Jimena tried not only to support her mother in the village, but also to provide a good life for her son. Although she knew she couldn't give him expensive toys or clothes, the boy was happy even with their picnics in the park or walks with Ramona and Rosa on weekends. But then another misfortune struck Jimena. There was another emergency at the factory, this time caused by a dangerous malfunction of the old equipment. The workers noticed the increasing pressure in the tanks and rushed to fix the situation, but they didn't manage to lower the pressure in time. One of the valves blew off and hit Jimena, who was among the first to respond, right in the head. Jimena didn't remember how she was dragged out of the factory. But she had fragmented memories of doctors leaning over her, the gentle rocking of the ambulance taking her somewhere. And then her mind plunged into darkness for a long time. She has a severe traumatic brain injury. We've induced a medical coma and are doing everything we can to stabilize her condition, the imposing doctor informed Ramona and Rosa, who were holding a tearful Juan. But our preliminary prognosis is quite promising. We are confident that the treatment will be successful. The man tried to comfort the women with a gentle smile. During Jimena's recovery, Ramona and Rosa took care of Juan, alternately looking after the boy and trying to support him in every way. They also visited Jimena together, and the child would often cling to his mother's hand, whispering to her while she lay unconscious in the hospital bed. Slowly but surely, Jimena began to recover. However, after the injury, she was left with a significant scar on her head, most of which gradually grew over with thick hair and a nervous tic. At first, she couldn't even speak, and only incoherent sounds, more like moaning, escaped her lips. Despite this, Ramona, Rosa, and Juan were happy to see Jimena recovering. They believed in the optimistic forecasts of the doctors and helped in any way they could, sometimes just by being there and telling her everything would be all right, other times by praising Juan's successes in school, who seemed to take up his studies with renewed vigor as soon as his mother woke up. And yet, Jimena found it hard to believe that everything would be all right. She was more afraid not for herself, but for her son. She saw how fearlessly the boy looked at her while she was recovering, but she understood that the scar on her head must have terrified him, and her inability to speak normally with him must have frightened him too. But no matter how scared Jimena was, Juan showed his best side. When Jimena was discharged from the hospital, he, along with Ramona and Rosa, took care of her and helped her with everything. Sensitive to others' suffering and incredibly kind, the boy helped his mother cope with the speech disorders she had after the injury. He patiently and lovingly talked with her, encouraging her not to give up and celebrating every small victory. There were often times when he understood what his mother wanted to say when others could not. This gave Jimena hope for a brighter future, and she often cried tears of joy, realizing how lucky she was with her son. He truly was her pride and a real gift from God. Returning to work at the factory, Jimena encountered support from her colleagues. They had supported her and helped her when needed during her recovery in the dormitory. They understood well that such a tragedy could happen to anyone, and the fact that Jimena survived and was quite capable of working was considered a small miracle. After all, fatal accidents were not uncommon in their line of work, and so they considered Jimena lucky and rejoiced that she was alive. Little by little, life got better, and Jimena began to go for walks again, though she often caught the judgmental glances of strangers. Although neither Ramona, Rosa, nor Juan were afraid of her tick and scar, Jimena was well aware of how uncomfortable it made other people to see her. More than once she had seen mothers clutching their children to them or picking them up and hurrying away from her, and the realization of this fear on the part of others made Jimena feel ashamed and resentful. One day after a walk, Juan persuaded his mother to go to the store and buy something nice to make Ramona and Rosa happy when they got home. Jimena didn't object, continuing to communicate with her son and answer him, though still not in the same way as before. She still spoke to her son and he understood her. The woman did not notice that they were being noticed, engrossed in conversing with Juan, who was telling her about something he had read in a new book that had fascinated him the day before. "Oh, Holy Virgin Mary," suddenly sounded nearby. Jimena looked over and saw a woman in her 30s covering the girl's ears. The woman's face was clearly disgusted, and Jimena immediately realized that the stranger's reaction was caused by her presence and speech. "How can you not be ashamed to go out in public?" wailed the stranger. "You are so ugly, and you can't speak at all. You should have stayed at home and not embarrassed yourself. How else the guardianship authorities are not interested in you, because your son would be better off in a normal family, not with such a mom." Jimena lowered her gaze as she listened to this scolding, and the same sadness that she had felt before settled back into her heart. Perhaps, she thought, Juan would be better off in the care of someone else, not a cripple who not only looked awful, but could not even speak after the accident. And the stranger kept on saying, "Shame on you. You scare decent people and children on the street. And your son is a disgrace. You should have stayed home and stayed out of the street." Jimena wanted to go away from the store and pulled Juan's hand, but the boy suddenly snatched the palm from his mother's hand and stepped towards the stranger and her daughter. "Shut up," the boy shouted, stomping his foot and looking angry. It was the first time Jimena had ever seen her son so upset by another's words. "Are you not ashamed to judge others?" Juan spoke out loudly, scowling at the woman. "My mom is a hero. She was scarred and injured when she rescued people in the factory. How dare you swear at her? She is a hero. She survived, even though she was hurt. You don't know what it was like for her to recover from such injuries. You didn't see her crying at night because of the scar. You didn't sit with her, helping her learn to talk again. You don't get to judge my mom. She's strong. She has endured her trials and is happy every day because she is alive and can spend time with me. I'm proud of my mom. And it's not for you to swear at the way she looks or talks." Jimena looked around, seeing that their argument had attracted the attention of other shoppers and store employees. She stepped towards her son, trying to grab his shoulder to lead him away, but the boy stomped his foot again, though tears glistened in his eyes. "I am proud of my mom because neither injuries nor trials have broken her." Juan continued his tirade. "I am proud of her because she keeps living. Because she makes me smile. I am proud of her because, no matter what, she loves me with all her heart. I am proud. I am proud of her kindness. And no matter what you think, ma'am, she is the most beautiful person in the world. You are a mean woman because no one has ever been proud of you. But I am proud of my mom. And my aunts are proud of her too. The stranger, taken aback by such a tirade and the child's assertiveness, suddenly noticed that all the customers and approaching store clerks were looking at her with disapproval. Ashamed, she hastily grabbed her daughter and rushed out of the store, leaving her basket of groceries on the floor. Jimena hugged her son tightly, brushing away the tears on her face. "Son," she whispered to him, feeling his arms around her neck. "I love you so much." "Mom." "Mommy," Juan replied. "Don't listen to anyone. You are the most wonderful, the kindest, the strongest in the whole world, and the most beautiful. I love you and I am very proud of you, Mom. And I am proud of you, son." They didn't see the gathered onlookers wiping away tears, touched by the little boy's act of bravery in standing up to a stranger who dared to speak against his mother. Jimena was proud of her son. He gave her a sense of warmth and instilled in her the belief that she truly was a strong woman. Her father's departure from the family hadn't broken her. Neither had the hard-working days nor a man's betrayal. Life with the birth of her son didn't break her either, even though it seemed more difficult for a single mother to support not only herself and her child, but also her elderly mother in the village. And certainly, the attitude of narrow-minded people in society who judged everyone only by outward appearances, without ever thinking that the most beautiful people could be utterly rotten inside, while those bearing scars and lacking natural beauty were often the most understanding, kind, and responsive, didn't break her. In the evening, over a simple yet incredibly delicious cake, Juan told Ramona and Rosa how he defended his mother from a wicked woman, and the neighbors in the dormitory laughed for a long time at the idea that some stranger could think that appearance was the only thing one could judge a person by. However, they praised Juan's courage and honesty for a long time, proud of his actions. Year after year went by, the dormitory residents changed, some moved out, some changed jobs. New faces, new acquaintances, many new and completely unique stories about the lives of new neighbors. Ramona followed Rosa's advice and decided to change her life for the better. It was becoming harder and harder for her to keep an eye on the bunch of kids in the workshop. After all, she was no longer young. Over the many years, she had accumulated quite a few unused vacation days, so Ramona went to the management, firmly determined to demand payment for all the vacations she hadn't taken over the years. Although she initially didn't quite believe in the success of her endeavor, the management couldn't deny that 30 years of service at their factory meant something. They met her halfway, and Ramona was surprised to find that the funds she received were enough to buy a small apartment. Rosa rejoiced along with Jimena and Juan, celebrating Ramona's housewarming in a very modest, but her own apartment. Their collective mother, having left the factory, got a new job as a florist. She had once loved flowers very much and knew a lot about how to choose different bouquets and combined buds with fragrant flowers of other kinds so that even the smallest bouquet was charming. Ramona became more cheerful and often joked that if she had known florists were paid more than workshop supervisors, she would have left the factory much earlier. "Oh, no. Where would you all be without me?" the craftswoman would retort, laughing and hugging her friends and Juan. It seemed that Rosa's life was also finally starting to improve. Among the many suitors seeking her attention but not always receiving it, a rather modest and quiet but incredibly kind man suddenly appeared. At first, Rosa was cautious, remembering how much sorrow she had endured from men, but gradually he melted her heart, showing himself to be exactly who he was, a kind, responsive, and courteous man who soon won her over. With him, Rosa felt genuinely happy. When he proposed to her, Rosa was over the moon with happiness. The wedding took place rather quickly, and everyone celebrated, including Ramona, Jimena, and her son, who rejoiced for the woman and her newfound happiness. And when she told them a few months later that she was expecting a baby, even Juan declared that he would be the older brother to Aunt Rosa's future child. And so it was, when Rosa gave birth to a charming baby girl, everyone helped her, just like in the dormitory days when Jimena was surrounded by the care and love of her neighbors. Even Juan helped with the baby if any circumstances arose, proving himself to be a real older brother, even though they weren't biologically related. Jimena, meanwhile, was finally able to retire and returned to her mother's home. By that time, her speech had fully recovered, not without Juan's help. The once small village had transformed beyond recognition, and Jimena looked in amazement at the neat and tidy roads, cell towers, new buildings and factories, several high-rise apartment buildings, and even a large farm. During the years spent away from home, the village had changed so much that one couldn't help but be delighted that the formerly quiet and unremarkable village had become a real urban-type settlement, where finding work was much easier and opportunities had greatly increased. By that time, Jimena's mother had sold the livestock to the owner of the new farm and kept only a garden on her plot, where she grew several varieties of her favorite sweet peppers and luxurious flower beds that delighted not only her but everyone around. No longer did they have to strain their backs in the household or work in hard and dangerous industries, so Jimena and her family lived happily, still meeting with Ramona and Rosa and their families. And Juan? The boy grew up, studied, and tried his best. He didn't want to let his mother and aunts and grandmother down, and so the smart boy grew into a clever young man and one day ran home with very joyful news. "Mom! Grandma!" he shouted, calling out to his relatives, who heard him from the garden, where they were enjoying the scents of the flowers and the warm day that warmed their bodies on the veranda. What happened? The women, startled by his cries, jumped up. Juan ran to them, happy, smiling, and couldn't hold back a joyful shout. "I got accepted." Jimena recovered before her mother, hugging her son and rejoicing in his success. It didn't matter to her which university he got accepted to, the main thing was that he got in. She had no doubt that her son could get into university, and even upon finishing school, she saw how many opportunities Juan had. "Oh, what wonderful news!" finally exclaimed his grandmother Anita. "We must celebrate this. Aren't you even interested in which university I got into?" Juan smiled even wider. Hearing the name of the prestigious university, considered the best in the country, the women couldn't contain their enthusiastic shouts, hugging the young man again. Everyone who had influenced the boy from an early age saw him off. On the platform stood his grandmother Anita, proud of her daughter and grandson. Next to her stood the happily smiling Jimena, grateful to God for sending her such a wonderful son, whom she was immensely proud of. And next to them stood Ramona and Rosa with their grown-up daughter. Hugging all the women tightly, Juan set off towards a bright future, convinced that he could repay them all for their kindness and support. He couldn't have dreamed of a better family.